kind of hard to follow that. Turn your Pew Bible, or if you brought your Bible, to Mark chapter 5. In the Pew Bible, it's page 952. If it's not, see Daniel and beat him up afterwards. While you are turning there, I want to take a drink of water. Mark chapter 5. We're going to look at 21 through 43. Double check myself. Yep, there are only 43 verses in Mark chapter. I'm kidding. Mark chapter 5, 21 through 43. You say, but we didn't look at one chapter. We can look at 1 through 43 if you... No, I'm kidding. 5:21 through 43. And when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered about him, and he stayed by the seashore. And one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up and upon seeing him fell at his feet and entreated him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live." And he went off with him, and a great multitude was following him and pressing on him. And a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years had endured much at the hands of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. And after hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she thought, if I just touch his garment, I shall get well. And immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had proceeded from him, he had gone forth and turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garment?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude pressing on you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see the woman who had done this, but the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." And while he was speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any more?" But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the synagogue officials, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official and beheld a commotion and people loudly weeping and wailing. And he entered into them and he said, "What's the commotion and weeping? The child has not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing at him, and putting them all out, he took along the child's father, mother, and his companions, and entered the room where the child was. And taking the child by the hand, he said, "Talitha cum," which translated means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl arose and began walking. And she was 12 years old, and immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave strict orders that no one should know about this, and said that something should be given to her to eat. All right, Mark chapter 5. Pick up here. We've jumped over the passage of the healing of the demoniac. Essentially what happens, just fill you in real quick. Jesus crosses over the Sea of Galilee. Last week we saw how the disciples thought they were going to die in a boat with Jesus in it, which is kind of interesting in itself. So the disciples think they're going to die in a boat with Jesus in it. They go over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus heals this demoniac, and then the people of the town say, "Hey, we don't care where you go, but you cannot stay here. You and your friends, go away," because he cost them the product of the pigs that went off the cliff. And they were terrified of this. And you would be a little scared too if a guy that you knew with extra human strength that you would chain down every night in the catacombs or in the cemetery broke the chains and started running around again, and you threw out the demons. So they said, "Go away." So the same boat that they got into to cross the sea, they get into the boat and go back. Now, I don't know about you, but if I get on a ride and it stops working, I don't get back on that ride. I don't care. But they get back in the boat and everything is fine. And they land, and the multitude gathers again. We're going to look here at two individuals that are going to come and see Jesus and come some obstacles to come see Jesus. And notice that they are slightly different in their approach than the disciples. The disciples are in the midst of a storm. They know who Jesus is, and they're terrified of the circumstances of the storm. These individuals also know who they are, and despite all that they've suffered, know that they just go and see Jesus. These things will get fixed, or have the high potential of being fixed. And we see a man by the name of Jairus who comes. Now, it tells us that he's an official of the synagogue. One translation would say he is a ruler in the synagogue. Now, the synagogue system and the temple system are separate but yet similar. The temple is in Jerusalem. When the Jews went into the diaspora, when they were scattered, they had to find a way of teaching the law and had to find a way of teaching the people the doctrine of the Jewish faith. And so they developed the synagogue system. And the way you develop a synagogue is you must have 10 males of age. And then you start a synagogue. And so you had synagogues all around, but you went to temple to offer your sacrifices. Now this man is a ruler in the synagogue. Is Jesus and the rulers in the Jewish elite on the same page as likey friends? No. So, though the text doesn't tell us that Jairus is in that camp, more than likely as a high official within the synagogue system, he probably is on Team Pharisee more than he is on Team Jesus. And yet, he knows that he has a very sick girl. Notice what the text says. Notice what the text says. Let's take a look at what the text says about this young girl. Synagogue official came upon him, and seeing Jesus fell at his feet and entreating him earnestly. So he falls prostrate, recognizing a man of authority. Jews don't do that very often, especially very Orthodox Jews. They did not like having to do that to other men of authority, especially Roman citizens, or the Roman soldiers. And if you are not in league with Jesus, they probably are having a hard time with that. But recognizing the power and authority of Jesus does so. Why? My little daughter. It's a term of endearment. I have two little girls. One day they'll be not so little girls, and I will still refer to them as my two little girls. Why? Because they're my girls. Is at the point of death, please come and lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live. And she is at the very point. Her life is at such a state that she is dying. She's not sick and may die. She's not sick and the possibility of her death is possible. She is dying. Period. As an official that is possibly in alignment against you, he still had to overcome this to save his daughter and recognize the source and power of the authority that Jesus had to come and seek him out to the preservation of his daughter. Now, when we read this story and we think that Jairus' house is like 20 miles away, folks, they live very closely together. He crosses, he gets off the boat. It's probably maybe a 10, 15, 20, maybe an hour walk. And Jairus asks him, come see my daughter and lay your hands on her, for she is dying. It's really the best way of looking at this. And she says, let's go. So on their way, let's take a look at what happens here. So on their way, verse 25, and a woman who had hemorrhaged for 12 years and endured much at the hands of many physicians, has spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. This account is in all three of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Mark is the only one that records this little line. And it's kind of interesting that Luke never records this, Luke being a physician. Notice what Mark says. She suffered a lot at the hands of physicians. You'll never find that in Luke, because Luke's a doctor. It's like saying, like having another person that was a lawyer writing a book of the Bible, and she suffered much at the hands of lawyers. No, I'm not going to put that line in there. She suffered much at the hands of physicians and spent all that she had and was not helped, but had grown worse. In both situations, both people that are coming to see Jesus for help are at the very end of things. This woman had gone and seen doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor and had spent all of her money. We have folks today that do this inside the church. We have a health and wealth crowd. And it's, you got to sow a seed of faith and Jesus will honor that and heal you. I don't see Jesus asking for $25 from this lady. Or a seed of faith from this person. And yet we have folks that do this in the church, and there are people that suffer greatly at the hands of church people and pastors for a healing that's not ever going to come because it's coming in the wrong vein. She has gone to doctor after doctor after doctor. They cannot fix this. Now here's the interesting thing. She is ceremonially unclean in Jewish culture. She touches Jesus, he now becomes what? Unclean. And he has to wait a week and go through a purification ritual. And that's not going to happen. Isn't that neat? I should come with sound effects. But it had grown worse. And hearing about it, she comes up in the crowd behind him and touches his cloak. For she thought, if I just touch his garment, I will get well. Notice the difference between her level of faith and the disciples' level of faith in the boat. I'm in the boat, Jesus is with us. Jesus is not going to let himself die. Jesus is not going to let anything happen to him. So let's just sit down and just not worry about it. But instead, they're panicked and terrified. Notice her level of faith. If I but touch, and one of the Gospels says, his tassel of his robe. Just the smallest part of the robe, I can be healed. Now, she's not one of the disciples. She's heard about his great healing, but she probably hasn't seen a lot of it. Disciples see it all the time. Notice the difference. There's an old statement, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. And I can attest that my busiest times are usually when bad things are about to happen or we're about ready to do something that has a high potential of danger. Remember my first tour in Iraq? We got there December 5th, and I had a line out the door until the time I left to get on the plane on the 22nd. With soldiers scared to death of going over the berm. You're like going, you'll be all right. You'll be fine. You'll get through it. Are you scared? Yes. Well, you don't seem scared. Can I stop what's going to happen? No? Okay, then don't need to be worrying about that. Why? Proximity to death brings a heightened awareness of your mortality. And also proximity to death also tends to make people slightly a little bit more religious, does it not? Have you ever noticed that? I'm about ready to die. Somebody get me a pastor or a chaplain. Why? Well, proximity to death, just to hedge my bets, just to make sure. I don't think this is the case, but she has tried everything she can. Jairus has tried everything he can, and his daughter is dying, and she is hemorrhaging, and has done so for 12 years. That's a long time. And notice what she says, if I touch the hem of his garment, I shall get well. And immediately her flow of blood dried up. And she felt in her body that she was healed of affliction. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had proceeded from him, and he had gone forth and turned around in the crowd and saying, who touched my garments? Now here's a very sticky question. Here's the sticky part of the New Testament here in Mark and in this story. It seems that Jesus is asking a question of which he does not know the answer to. And people like to seize upon this passage, and then they go to what we call kenotic theory, which comes out of Philippians chapter 3, verse 14, that basically is that God, when he takes on human form as the second person of triune God, the Son of Man is man primarily with a sprinkling of deity. When Jesus comes to earth in the form of man, he gives up certain divine powers. The problem is, if he isn't fully God, then there isn't a full restoration of sacrifice. Hebrews makes that argument poignantly clear why it's important that he be deity. And so you have a problem. How can he not know but yet be divine. Well, I had a brigade commander. I used to love watching him work. He never asked a question that he didn't already know the answer to. And it was so fun to watch him ask this to drill sergeants, because he would come up and he would ask the drill sergeant what he was, what was going on, what he was teaching, and the level in which they were supposed to execute this task that he was teaching them. And you could always tell the drill sergeants that were not fully versed on the topic matter, because they began to tap dance. And he would let them tap dance for a few minutes, and then he would start asking them questions about the knowledge level that they were supposed to have. And you could see the guy tap dance more and more. And then he would try to buffalo his way out of the situation by throwing answers out there. And it just gets to the point where it was horrifically ugly. Another point, when I was a young boy, one of the members of my family liked to take photographs. Might have been me, may not have been me. I'm never going to say or confirm or deny it, but Kimmy may have ended up with that. Many of you may have pictures taken by Kimmy that you're not aware of. You have been photobombed whether you realize it or not. I like to take photographs. Someone within the family like to take photographs. And this is back in the old school, for those of you today that think cameras always had SD cards. This is when you had the hard black film canister that went around and you plugged it in and the flash bulb came in the little thing on top and you rotated it for each picture. And my parents would always get these interesting pictures of a trash can, of a desk, of the wall. Well, one day they got a picture of this mirror with a bright flash of light in it and two legs sticking out of the flash of light. Now, to this day, there's still not enough evidence to convict. And my dad gets the photo and he hands it to me. He says, do you know who took this picture? That Brian, that's my older brother. I swear he's stealing my socks and wearing my jeans again. I don't know what you're going to do with him, Dad. Who took the photo? Was it evident? Yeah, the evidence was everywhere. Did my dad ask me the question because he didn't have a clue? No. Did Jesus know who touched him? Yes, because the text tells you. The disciples look at him and go, are you on dope? Do you see the crowd? Everyone is pushing against you. And you ask a question, who touched you? Everyone is touching you. Do we need to go lay down, Jesus? Are you okay? You need to get back in the boat and lay down on the cushion because you were asleep during the storm? Who touched me? Why does he ask that question? The disciples proceeded to say to him, you see the multitude pressing in on you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling and aware of what had happened to her, came down and fell before him. One of the arguments that is put forth on this is, one, Jesus doesn't know who touched him, and as such, is surprised when she reveals himself. Now, the problem is that you run into a Jesus who doesn't know something, which means he's not omniscient, which means you have another problem with his omniscience in other sections of the text. Or you have a point that is being made that miracles that are done by Jesus aren't done in secret. Why? The purpose of the miracles are not to bring glory to Jesus, but to bring glory to the Father. And if done in secret, Jesus now becomes a relic. She'll go and say, all I had to do was touch his hem. I've been to St. Peter's Basilica. And if any of you have ever been there, there's a statue of St. Peter where people for centuries have about rubbed his big toe clean off. Seriously. It's gone. Now you can rub on the right toe. The left toe is gone. You can't even touch that one anymore. Rubbed it and kissed it. I don't know about you, but I'm not rubbing something someone else's and kissing. So there's thousands of people for centuries have been rubbing a toe and then kissing it. I'm just not doing it. We have more fragments of the cross then there were crosses. There's enough bones of the apostles to build more than the apostles. And they're all over Europe. That was big business back in the Dark Ages. Why? Because if you had those things and you believed in those things had power to heal. See, if the glory doesn't go to the Father and what Jesus does, Jesus is a relic. People can just come and touch and believe. And there's no glorification of the Father in this action. Secondly, she's ceremonially unclean, is she not? Going to demonstrate the power of Jesus not only to heal, but to heal an unclean woman and then keep trucking on. Because guess who's with him? A synagogue official. Who's going to know instantaneously that he is what? Unclean. And do you think he cares if he's unclean about his daughter being dead? Oops, sorry, I gave it away in here in a few minutes. You think he cares? No! Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. And while he was speaking, they came from the house and said, the house of the synagogue official, saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? But Jesus, overhearing what was spoken, said to the synagogue officials, do not be afraid any longer. Only believe. Some of your translation says, has died. Some says, is dead. Has died. Greek is a very interesting language. It has several words for dying, dead. This isn't the word for dead. It's the word for dying. She has passed away. She has just passed away. The reason why this is important is when Ephesians tells us that we are dead in our trespasses and sin, the word dead there means nekros, necrotic, rotting flesh. Lazarus is the Greek word thanatos, means dead, but not yet nekros. Eventually, you will die, you will be thanatos, which is dead, and then you will proceed to being nekros, which is rotting corpse. Ephesians calls us rotting corpses. Lazarus is a dead thing, and this girl is a died thing. And there's a distinction in the Greek, and the distinction is there to differentiate between levels in which Jesus is going to act. Which is why when we are revived as necrotic things, that's a miracle in itself of great proportion spiritually. This girl has died. Don't bother the master anymore. It's beyond his scope. And Jesus' response is almost the same to that. Hey, don't listen to them, only believe. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Hey, believe in what I am about to do. Do not listen to them. Notice the level of faith involved in both of those, which is significantly higher than that of the apostles who traveled with him, who were paralyzed by fear, thinking they were going to die because they were on a roller coaster ride called the Sea of Galilee. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John. Right here you see the distinction between the three, in which there's like an inner circle. Peter, James, and John seem to fit that bill. Then it came about, and they came to the house of the synagogue official. Behold, a commotion of the people, loud weeping and wailing. Some people believe this is the paid mourners, and this was the thing in Israel at the time, is that you would pay people to wail at your funeral. I don't think that's the case. A lot of scholars say she's a 12-year-old girl of a synagogue official. Be a lot of crying there, right? Think he has to pay for somebody. There's a lot of folks that would know this child, and there's a lot of wailing there. But notice what happens here. Jesus comes into the house, and he says, what is this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. The child hasn't died. She's asleep. And this is where we get a concept in theological terms of soul sleep. A lot of people go, well, the soul goes into a state of sleep and has the capability to either be resuscitated or there's a post-death conversion. You can't get that from that passage. She's dead. And then there are some folks that say, oh no, the child is in a coma. Here's the thing, if she is in a coma, the crowd's behavior makes no sense. Because when he says she's asleep, they laugh at him. If she was dead, that would account for the laughing. Is she still breathing but yet out cold? So the child has died. And Jesus goes, she's asleep. Sleep is a phraseology that is utilized in the New Testament to represent for death. And they began to laugh at him, and he put them all out, and he took the child's father and mother and his companions into the room, taking the child by the hand. Now, we all are aware that he is ceremonially unclean, correct? But so is he now, because the child is what? Dead. Can a good Jew touch a dead body? No, they cannot. So again, he touches a dead body. And he says, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl began to walk, for she was 12 years old. We see in this text two sets of individuals that are seeking healing. A father for a child and a woman for herself. All have probably exhausted every means to obtain healing for themselves. Mark tells us this woman spent and endured much at the hands of physicians. When I went to go get this stuff treated that's on my head, the first time I went for treatment, I got over 200 injections into my scalp, and I was explaining it to somebody, and they said, and no joke, people ask the dumbest questions sometimes. They look at me and they go, well, did it hurt? And I went, no, not at all, it didn't hurt at all. Really? No, it hurts! Jab you in the head 200 times! I suffered much at the hands of physicians. Did it hurt? She had suffered much. She had plenty of excuses not to go and find Jesus. I have looked high and low for a cure. This guy may or may not do it. The crowd is closing in. I'm unclean. If I touch him, he comes unclean. Notice all the avenues that she has to say, I don't really need to pursue this further. Jairus is an official at the synagogue. His team and Jesus' team are not on the same team. You got Team Jesus and you got Team Pharisee, and they don't like each other. And he has to overcome that. And he's got a young daughter that's dying. And he has every opportunity to not seek after Jesus. Or not continue. Your daughter's dead? Hey, Jesus, thanks for wanting to come to the house, but my daughter's dead. I got to go. We're not planning a healing, we're planning a funeral. There are always obstacles that are going to come along within our walk that are going to present themselves as opportunities to divert us from seeing Jesus. Matter of fact, the woman touching Jesus is an interruption in the first level of the miracle. The man comes to Jesus and says, hey, come heal my daughter. And on the way, this woman interrupts that. And yet, you see, it doesn't seem to faze Jesus. As a matter of fact, that interruption is an opportunity for Jesus to demonstrate the power of God in the purpose of the woman, and then goes on because his delay costs the girl her life. And by arriving there at the house after she's dead, allows another opportunity for God to be magnified in that action. Now notice he tells the family, say nothing of this. That fat chance that's going to happen, isn't it? That's like when he cleanses the 10 lepers and he says, don't say anything. And then, hey, look what Jesus did. Yeah, okay, that doesn't happen. There are obstacles that are here that prevent or could have prevented them from finding Jesus, seeking Jesus out, and having Jesus come and heal them or perform a healing within them. And at any moment, they could have taken any one of those. We allow obstacles like that all the time in our life. There are things that we believe that God can do, believe that God will do, know that God can do, but in one regard, as we talked about last week, we believe that He can do it for everyone else but me. Yeah, but you. Yeah, I can pray for you, but it's nice that Jesus does great things for other people. We believe that. Or we allow things to get in our way as we begin to seek after Jesus. We begin to look at things not through the lens of faith, but we begin to use the lens of science and say, well, there's a scientific way to explain these things. I want to know how the scientific way, when I touch someone's hand, they come back to life, because I'd like to see that. Let me see the scientific way in which Jesus can look at a man with 1,000 demons within him and says, come out. And they go into a herd of pigs and over the cliff. I can see that. I'd like to see the scientific way in which a man can stand up in the middle of a boat and say, be still. Just like when a dad walks into a room and there's chaos and commotion. Not that that ever happens in my house. And they go, stop. Get the wood spoon. Yes, Chris Lusk, I use a wood spoon. I'd like to see the scientific excuse for when, much later here, we're going to see the disciples in the boat and Jesus walks on the water. See, we allow that to be something that prevents us from seeing, because while we believe that there are things that Jesus can do, we look and see that faith and science are an opposite. But yet, when you look at most of the early writings, faith and science are one and the same. They do that. They intermingle. I'm not a man that is devoid of scientific knowledge, but I wash everything through my lens of faith, and I understand science and those as combined. Christianity and science are not polar opposites. They go hand in hand. But people utilize that as a means to keep from seeing Jesus. I am too far gone to be healed by Jesus spiritually. Jesus can't deliver me. I'm too wretched a person. Too wretched an individual. I'm too sinful. All these are excuses that we use to keep us from seeing Jesus. To find Jesus, to cling to Jesus, and seek Him in our life of restoration. At any moment, Jairus could have walked away from this. When they came up and said, hey, your daughter's dead, Jairus could have walked away. At any moment in the crowd, the woman could have been too terrified to touch the hem, knowing what it would do to Jesus. And yet, you notice, Jesus doesn't seem overly concerned that he is ceremonially unclean. Matter of fact, he trucks on. Twice. What obstacles do you use to keep from seeing Jesus? What obstacles do you use to keep from fully embracing the walk of the believer that prevents you from stepping out in faith on things He's calling you to do? There are always excuses. There are always obstacles. There are always interruptions. And we have the option either to take those interruptions and be diverted, or to look past those interruptions and truck on. What obstacles do we use? There are some that are here today and you have never had a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that in itself is an obstacle to coming to know who Jesus Christ is. I'm too filthy, I'm too dirty, I'm not savable. The fact of the matter is, there's no one that is not savable. He's died upon the cross to cover the sins of all man. Capable of delivering the most vilest of criminal, the most vilest of person. Well, I believe that God is in control, but not fully in my finances. I believe that God is in control, but not fully within my health. I believe God is in control, but I don't believe that He is going to do X, Y, Z, whatever the answer is. The fact of the matter, those are all interruptions and excuses that prevent you from encountering and engaging with Jesus. Jairus could have done it. Jairus was not on the team with Jesus. Matter of fact, we don't even really know what's going to go on after that. this woman could have allowed her condition to keep her from touching Jesus' hem. What excuse do you use? Because it doesn't merit. The same Jesus who healed these two is the same Jesus that dies upon the cross for your sin. It's the same Jesus that is there awaiting for you to embrace Him and embrace Him fully within your life and walk with Him daily. Even though interruptions come, even though scary moments come, it's a scary thing to walk by faith. If it was easy, it wouldn't be called faith. It'd be called sight. Right? You want to walk by faith? Take some Legos, scatter it on the floor and turn off the light and walk. That takes a lot of faith right there, doesn't it? What obstacles? What obstacles do we use? Let us pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to come before you. We ask, Heavenly Father, that you will be with us today as we examine our lives, both believer and unbeliever. Examine why we resist the obstacles that are there that we sometimes take, the excuses that we use. Help us to have the faith as this woman who knew that even after suffering years at the hands of physicians, expended all of her money, that there was healing in Jesus Christ. Jairus, the official who is possibly an opponent of Jesus, but still yet knew the power and authority of Jesus Christ's ability to bring healing to his young girl. And that same power and authority is evident today in the life of the believer, and is an opportunity for the non-believer to come and experience revival of dead flesh, of a dead spirit, of a dead heart, to breathe life anew as a new believer. We ask that you watch over us and keep us safe and be with us as we leave here. That at every opportunity we have to follow after you, we embrace it in the opportunity of faith instead of looking for excuses to fail. We ask for these things in your name, we pray. Amen. If you'll please stand while the praise band sings. If you're here today and you'd like to know who Jesus is, like to have a relationship with Him, I'll be here at the front. I'll have my microphone turned off here in a minute. It'll be a conversation that me, you, and the Lord will have. If you've been coming and attending the church for a while and you say, today I'd like to make Skyline Baptist my home again, I'll be here at the front. The praise band will sing. Don't be worried. This is a great congregation. Great loving folks. So at this time, as they sing,
I've wandered far away from God. Now I'm coming home. The paths of sin too long I've trod. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home. Coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. I've wasted many precious years. Now I'm coming home. I now repent with bitter tears. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home. my strength renew, my home restored. Lord, I'm coming home.
We have Steve and Cassandra who have come and asked to be a part of Skyline Baptist Church and are going to... So I take that that's a yes. It's great for folks to be part of the body and to join. And so thank you for your hearty approval of this. And as we close out the service, after the service, you will welcome them to Skyline as the body, the warm body that we are. Ask for that. Who did I ask? Brother Bob Fay. If you will close us out with prayer. If you sit down with Joyce.
Thank you for the message, your word, your sweet word. We just thank you for the coming home. Thank you, Master, that you be with us as we go our several ways, bring you back to them. Thank you, Master.